right, hello and welcome. Today, we're going to explore one of the most fundamental concepts in Islam, faith, or as it's known in Arabic, Īmān. We're really going to break down what it means, what it's built on, and how it shapes an entire worldview, all based on some foundational Islamic texts. So, let's get right into it. At its heart, this is a question for everyone, right? No matter what your background is, you've probably wondered what it truly means to believe in something with your whole heart. So today, we're going to see how Islam approaches this very question. Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we've got a clear path laid out. First up, we're going to define the very essence of faith. Then, we'll look at the core beliefs that give it its structure. After that, we'll dig into the why, the evidence for belief. And finally, we'll see how God's attributes and practices shape this whole worldview. All right, so first things first, let's get right to the core of it. What exactly is Īmān? Well, according to the Qur'an, Īmān isn't just, casual agreement or an intellectual nod. It's a deep certitude of the heart. It's about a complete, willing submission of your innermost self, both your heart and your mind, to God. It's really an all-in kind of commitment. And what's really interesting is this powerful analogy used to describe faith. See, it's not a static object or some simple on-off switch. No, it's a living, breathing thing, kind of like a tree. It's got roots that need to be deep and firm, and branches that are always meant to grow and reach for the sky. And this idea of it being alive is so important because it means faith has this duality to it. On one hand, it can be nourished, by things like sound knowledge and righteous deeds, and it'll flourish. But on the other hand, things that go against it, they can cause it to wither and decay. This gets at a really core idea. Faith isn't just a static belief, it's a living state. It's directly strengthened or weakened by our actions. You just can't separate the two. Okay, so if faith is this living tree, then what's its structure? What gives it shape? Well, that brings us right to the 5 core beliefs that form its entire framework. So here they are, the 5 pillars that make up the whole structure of Īmān. And you can see how they really build on each other in a logical way. It all starts with the foundation, right? Belief in God. From there, it's about believing in how he communicates with us, through his angels who deliver messages to his prophets. And that message? It's all contained in the divine books. And it all leads up to the day of judgment, where we're held accountable for how we responded to all that guidance. So let's zoom in on that first and most crucial belief. How does a person arrive at believing in a God who, can't be seen? The approach here is really interesting. It combines both this innate feeling and just plain old rational thought. Okay, so the first argument is internal. The source text suggests that this recognition of a creator is literally woven into our very nature. It's described as this kind of primordial pledge, something that, while maybe not in our active memory, is still etched on our soul. And it's what draws us towards a higher power, almost like a child is instinctually drawn to its mother. But that raises a really fair and critical question, right? Our world is so focused on empirical evidence, on seeing and touching things. So how do you bridge that gap between the seen and the unseen? Well, the text actually proposes an analogy that I think we're all pretty familiar with. Okay, just think about gravity for a second. Have any of us ever seen the law of gravitation? Nope. We can't hold it. We can't put it under a microscope. It is in and of itself a completely unobservable reality. But what we do see are its effects, right? We see an apple fall to the ground. We feel the effort it takes to lift a heavy stone. We can observe the totally predictable, orderly movement of the moon and the stars. These are all tangible, observable things we experience every day. And here's the crucial point. We accept the existence of this unseen law, gravity, as a scientific fact. Why? Because it's the single best explanation for all the things we can observe. It's what connects and makes sense of everything. So, this very same logic is then applied to the argument for a creator. The observable evidence in this case is the entire universe itself. Its profound order, its intricate design, it's just amazing wisdom and creativity. These observations, the argument goes, all point to an unseen, intelligent cause that explains it all. So, believing that God exists is one thing, but Īmān goes deeper. It also requires understanding his nature. So what are God's attributes, and what are the consistent laws or practices that he uses to deal with his creation? The Qur'an describes God through a whole bunch of names and attributes, and these really help believers form a more complete relationship with him. They can be grouped into different categories. For instance, you have attributes of majesty, things like the king and the powerful, and these inspire awe. Then you have attributes of splendor, like the holy and the peacegiver, which inspire love and hope. Put them together and you get this really balanced understanding, not just a God to be feared, but also one to be loved and trusted. Now, among all these attributes, there's one concept that stands out as the most important of all: Tawḥīd. This is the absolute core principle of God's oneness and uniqueness. It means there is nothing and no one comparable to him, and that he has no partners. This really is considered the absolute cornerstone of faith in Islam.
Okay, so beyond attributes, there's this concept called sunnatullah, and the easiest way to think of this is as the unchangeable way God operates. You know how there are consistent physical laws in the universe? Well, the text explains that there are also consistent moral and spiritual laws that govern human life and history.
And some of those key practices really provide a framework for making sense of the world. For example, the whole idea of tests and trials suggests that hardship and prosperity, they're not random. They're actually opportunities for growth. Or take the rise and fall of nations. This provides a moral lens for looking at history, suggesting that societies rise and fall based on their collective justice and ethics. So this framework really views life not as just a series of random accidents, but as a meaningful story, all governed by divine principles.
So as we've seen, Īmān starts with this deep certitude in the heart, but then it expands outward to become this complete and structured worldview, a full framework for understanding our purpose, our actions, and our place in the entire universe. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. How might viewing the world through this kind of lens, a lens of innate purpose, divine laws, and ultimate accountability, how might that actually shape a person's day-to-day life, their choices, and their entire perspective on existence? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me today.